Hey, welcome back. This is part two of our feedback series where we're going over constructive feedback that people are giving, identifying the kind of the four main areas that you can look for in every piece of feedback, and talking about what you could do if you got the negative or inappropriate type of feedback. And I didn't mean to say negative because we're going to talk about good negative feedback and bad negative feedback, but I think you get the point. So, without further ado, I hope you've watched part one. If not, we'll put a description up here. I don't know, click the button thing and check out part one. This is part two, and this is talking about feedback about work ethic. Now, the point of these is to learn how to give better feedback yourself, which is important, but also to learn how to respond to feedback. And we're going to be able to listen and hear what's good feedback and not. And it's really hard to not react emotionally to any type of feedback, whether that's positive or negative. But I'm pointing out four main things, and if you can find those four main things in people's feedback, it'll help you be able to break down and find ways to improve, regardless of the emotion behind the feedback. It'll also help you be better at giving feedback, which is an underrated skill altogether. So, again, we're going through a list of 30 pieces of constructive feedback, and good and bad. We'll be breaking this into a few parts. And so, check this out. Right. So, without further ado, here is part two, and we're talking about feedback about work ethic. So, first, we're going to go through an appropriate positive example, and we're going to look for four things here, right? We're going to look for specific pain, an example of the consequences of that pain, the expectations, and ideas for improvement. Now, on positive feedback, you may not get all of these, but we are going to look for the specific pain that's resolved, the consequences of that, and potentially some ideas to improve it. And we'll take a look here, right? So this feedback is, I am so impressed with the effort you gave on this project, right? So specific pain would be around the effort, I suppose. Your commitment to our client and department is admirable. We were able to sign on off on the project ahead of schedule, all thanks to you. So the pain is around, I guess, how much you're working, the work involved here, and the consequences were a good thing here. It's positive feedback. We're able to sign off on the project ahead of schedule, right? So um, there's not really expectation or idea in here, but that's okay. It's positive feedback. We can understand it. We're reinforcing the fact that we loved how hard you worked. Okay, now let's look at an appropriate negative example. Thank you for all of your hard work you put in this project. Unfortunately, the deadline was missed, but I can see the solid effort you gave us. So, one, the pain was the deadline was missed, right? In the future, please come to me earlier if you feel a deadline is going to be missed. Um, two, I think we don't quite have the consequences here in this feedback, but we definitely have the expectation, right? If in the future, if you have an issue, go to them. We can all pull into support and ensure this doesn't happen again. That's kind of the fourth, the idea. So we are missing in this feedback a little bit of the consequences of your negative feedback, or excuse me, the consequences of the pain. And I guess maybe it's coupled together with the unfortunately the deadline was missed, right? So the pain was you gave us solid work, but the deadline was missed, which is this feedback actually is a little rough. Um, Thinking about it, because I think I could read this and say, hey, thanks for all your hard work and the solid effort. And this really isn't a thing about my work ethic as much as it is my communication that I could use some help. Whereas if this was a communication about work ethic, maybe a better example would be um, and it's really hard to give good feedback, but you could do something along the lines of, um, thanks for your work on this. We know we missed a deadline, and we would have liked to see a little more effort on your behalf here. That's a hard thing to say, but it would be there. Now let's look at the inappropriate negative feedback. Maybe I'm saying exactly what I shouldn't say. Let's take a read. You missed the deadline, which has affected our relationship with the client. This reflects poorly on you and the company. Whew, it's harsh. I mean, I think that's going to be a hallmark of these inappropriate things is it's the harshness, it's the cuttingness of this. Now, there's a difference between harsh and direct. And I actually think the appropriate negative example may not quite be direct enough. Um, and I think it's messing with the pain and the consequences. Are you asking me to communicate here better, or are you asking me to work harder? Is something that I'm a little confused about for their negative example here. And so, if we were thinking this through, right, and we know we have the four good things: we want pain, we want consequences, we want expectations, and we want ideas, right? And so, maybe just being direct of, hey, we missed the deadline. We or The pain really in this situation is someone didn't work hard enough. That is the feedback you're trying to give. Um, and maybe the pain would be, we'd like to have seen you work more to be able to reach this missed deadline. Like, it's harsh, it's direct, but it is kind of what it needs to be. Like, if that is what you're concerned about, you need to give that feedback there. So we'd like to see you worked harder to meet this missed deadline. In the future, if you feel like you can't meet a deadline, please communicate to us, right? That sets the expectation. And also, it really kind of gives the idea of please communicate with us. Setting the expectations a little hard is, truthfully, like, in this situation, did you expect somebody to be able to meet this deadline by themselves? And if this is feedback about work ethic, that's really, I think, what you'd be trying to say here. Um, so in the future, we expect you to be able to meet deadlines by yourself. If you're going to have an issue with that, please contact me, right? Like, those things, I think, meet those criteria of those four things: the pain, the consequences, the expectation, and an idea to be able to improve. Um, Ooh, that's a little hard. Now, imagine we got the inappropriate negative example. You missed the deadline, which has affected our relationship with the client. This reflects poorly on you and the company. What could you do to transform that into something that you can act on? Um, so, first, understanding the pain. I missed a deadline. That one's pretty clear. I can understand that. Understanding the expectation and the consequences. There's actually consequences in this inappropriate negative example better than in some of the other ones. We missed a deadline. It hurts the relationship. What is missing here is probably the expectation and the ideas. So I can now understand the pain. I missed a deadline. Well, I just kind of understand the consequences. Um, uh, Missed a deadline, and really, it's just really hard to communicate our work ethic issues in a way that's not hard. But we would like to see you work harder. And so you really just kind of need to kind of understand that pain and be able to ask questions. And part of this is probably asking the questions of, did I not work hard enough? Was this a time management issue? Was this a work ethic issue? Was this, what? How are they seeing it in their eyes? So I'm able to adjust and adapt to this. And so as I start going through these questions, I'm really trying to identify the pain, the true pain that they're expressing. And the true pain, maybe we thought you could handle this by yourself. Truthfully, in these examples, I think that's what's really being expressed here is, we thought you could handle this by yourself. You missed this deadline. Right. And so now, if I can start understanding those two things, they thought I could handle it. I missed the deadline. That was the consequences that hurt the customer. Right. The expectation is in the future, I can handle this thing by myself. Um, right. That's clearly what's being set here. The pain was, you didn't. It hurt the customer. We expect you to be able to, and then the ideas. So then I can jump into ideas and try and understand what's happening here. And it may be that you're being asked of too much. It may be that there's all unreasonable demands. It may be all sorts of things. But this is a great place to be able to start that conversation and reset expectations. Not all expectations are going to be fair. And a big part of the feedback process, whether you're giving or receiving, is managing those expectations and balancing them. And so imagine you're receiving this type of feedback as a customer, or not from a customer, from a client, from a patient, whatever it is. Right? This is hard feedback to get, because they're basically saying you didn't work hard enough in my behalf. Um, right? That's a hard thing to be able to understand. But partly, maybe it allows us to ask them questions of, what is the expectation? How much do they expect us to work on your behalf? What do they expect us to do? How do you manage these expectations? And it really can come back to trying to understand, how can you set these expectations right at the beginning so that they don't feel like you under fulfilled your responsibilities. This is part two. We still have a lot to talk about. It'd be interesting to see if these four things we've identified, right? Pain, consequences, expectations, and ideas, if these things resonate with any of the other pieces of feedback that they're giving. And let's see if we can identify them in part three. Should be a link in the description. Check us out. We'll be back there here in a second.